Do you need reliable and secure IoT connectivity? Then Telia has you covered. Whether you are connecting 10 or 1 million devices, Telia's award-winning network and solutions are tailored to your needs. Trusted by their customers, connecting over half the buses in Sweden and millions of electricity meters across the Nordics. Explore more on business.teliacompany.com. Welcome, Saurabh, to the IoT For All Podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. Let's kick this off and have you give a quick introduction about yourself as well as the company to our audience.
So my name is Saurabh Abhyankar. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at MicroStrategy. I don't want to date myself too much, but I've been in the BI and analytics and data space for about 20 years now. And you may hear it once in a while in my accent. I'm actually Canadian. I grew up in Vancouver, BC, and then I spent 15 or so years almost in Paris, France, with a company called BusinessObjects. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been here with MicroStrategy in Washington, D.C.
So I want to ask you, since given what the company does, I know you're very heavily into kind of the digital transformation world. Talk about where things are as an industry. Just when we say digital transformation, like what does that exactly mean in today's age, and kind of what does the current state look like within organizations from your perspective?
Yeah, maybe I'll give you a bit of a sense of MicroStrategy first, because we've basically been in this space for quite some time. So MicroStrategy was founded about 35 years ago now. So 1989, I think, was the original date. And we were one of the pioneers and have been one of the pioneers in BI and data access for all that time, and really reinventing the company every decade or so. And so nowadays, we are still, of course, in the analytics space, and we're also the largest holder of Bitcoin as a public company in the world. So we've evolved quite a bit over the last little while. It's interesting, right? Because when you talk about digital transformation, it's simultaneously exactly what it sounds like. And sometimes it's a lot more than you think, and sometimes a lot less than you think. And so just a couple of things. First of all, it's a transformation of everything that was historically paper-based, right, and manual, when the term sort of first came out, into the digital version of it, right? So whether it's going from, physical paper forms and whatnot into, digitizing those processes, digitizing into back-end ERP systems and so forth. And I say that, I'm stating the obvious, but I say that because actually there's a fair number of companies out there that are still making that journey, believe it or not. There's still a lot of manual processes, handmade. Sometimes it's like, Excel spreadsheets and stuff, which I get is not, paper, but it's not fully digital either from a process perspective. And so digital transformation really is on the very basic side, still a lot of companies just doing bread and butter, or let's shift from PDFs and basic, printed stuff to a digital version of it. All the way through to the kinds of companies that we typically work with, which are, Fortune 500 type companies that have incredibly robust operations. And really what they're trying to do is they're trying to optimize all of their business processes and really leverage data to power those processes better. And so what does that mean? It means things like, if you're a large retailer, instead of having to look at, printed stuff and sheets of things that you can try to figure out how to do inventory, to having, digital applications that tell people exactly what they should do, that can predict, inventory shortfalls and really get ahead of it so you can deliver a better customer experience. So there's a million examples I could give of digital transformation. But the point really is the state of digital transformation is everything from, there's still companies trying to figure out how to do some of the basic stuff, all the way through to companies doing some fairly advanced predictive analytics as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some companies trying to figure out, how to get to the cloud, how to move into the cloud. Like it's that kind of stuff, right? I mean, but obviously, you said there's a spectrum to this whole thing, like on what we're talking about here. If we rule out some of the people who are pretty big kind of laggards in all of this, and we're talking about kind of where we are now, the biggest initiatives with digital transformation, like we've talked about AI, we've talked about IoT in the past on the podcast, obviously given the name of the podcast and everything we focus on. But what are some of the big challenges that you all see in what you do to where digital transformation is kind of coming in and solving those problems?
On one side, there's a big challenge of time, believe it or not. So if you think about your average CXO tenure, it's gotten shorter over time, right? And so there was a period where you could make a 5 or 10 year as a CIO, you could make a 5-year investment or 8-year investment and have the ROI eventually show up after you've done the gigantic ERP migration or whatever. There's probably still some companies that can do those kinds of investments, but for the most part, people nowadays are measured in quarters, days, weeks, months, not so much in years anymore. And so that the first challenge is, how do you get a return as fast as possible? And that's something that really drives CFOs crazy because you look at these things, their CIO comes and says, you know what, the world would be so much better if we consolidated to this, this one ERP system, or if we built this giant data warehouse, 3 years later, 5 years later. But the reality is it often takes twice as long, often costs twice as much. And the time and ROI are a very difficult thing for a lot of companies to deal with. And so where we see success more and more is more of an agile approach where some of the best customers that I've talked to, they really start really at the end, like the end goal with a very specific metric or a very specific thing they're trying to optimize. Maybe they're trying to optimize, updating your shelves with inventory, or maybe you're trying to optimize, how many insurance claims are automatically approved, right? Some very specific thing and the ROI on that. And then they work their way back to the digital transformation systems to achieve it. That tends to work better.
One area that we haven't touched a lot about that I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on is around business intelligence tools. So we think of like BI tools and how AI is influencing, is transforming those tools. And maybe it would be good to kind of start just for some of our audience who may not know exactly what we mean when we're talking about business intelligence tooling. Like what is that exactly? And then when we layer on AI, what is that now kind of taking that BI tool and enabling it to do that it wasn't able to do before to help enterprises be better decision makers using real data?
What's the goal of BI? The goal of BI has always been, how do we deliver the information that people need at the moment that they need it so that they can do their job better, right? That's a very generic thing to say, but the spectrum there is actually pretty broad as well. It can be strategic, like maybe you're a CXO or a VP of something, and the kind of information you need is like aggregated strategic information to make big decisions. Like, do I open a store here? Do I shut down the store? Those kinds of things. Do I change my product mix? Do I spend more on marketing over here or versus over there? Big strategic decision. But on the other side of it is that operational worker that is literally stocking shelves or is working in a hospital or whatever. Which patient do I serve next? Which customer do I serve next? What products do I stock? That kind of stuff. And so there's a spectrum. And what we've seen is the tooling. The tooling is basically tools for practitioners, usually they're BI professionals, to access information and construct things, whether they're dashboards or reports, to serve these people's needs. But that's kind of what the industry that we've been in for a really long time. And so where AI plays a role is, as you can imagine, well, we started off with the end user goal, but then I said, well, in order to achieve that end user goal, you got to do all this pre-work with these professionals that build stuff, right? Well, that's the part that I think AI can help a ton with, either shrinking that way down so that not everything has to be pre-built, not everything has to be predefined, and massively accelerating that person's job on the BI side, the tool side. And the other area AI can help as well is for those end users. Like I said, they just want timely information. And if AI can figure out who they are, what they're working on, and the information that they need to do their job better, then their life gets better without even realizing that they're using AI. And, you and I were talking as we entered about, where we live, and I use, there's a lot of AI driven weather app because I want to know if a tornado is coming towards me. And I want to know if the real heat index is above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but it just tells me because it knows where I live and it knows that I care about that. And it doesn't have to think very much about it. Or I don't have to think very much about it.
Are there still organizations out there that struggle to make data accessible and actionable? Because I imagine, especially the bigger the organization is, you go from top level all the way down to frontline workers, being able to make the data accessible, translate the data, making it to turn into something that is actionable by each stage of the company is probably not the easiest thing to do. So what's kind of being done to overcome that challenge? so that companies can make better decisions using data and not rely on, other factors that might kind of influence their decision-making process?
Not only does it remain a problem, it's actually the biggest problem. Whether it's you want a dashboard or a report or you want some Q&A interface or whatever it is that you want, the biggest issue is how do you get the data in a shape that you can trust it? And so how have people solved that problem? Well, historically, you can solve it by just ignoring it and just, getting some chunk of data and manually checking and go, okay, that's fine. The way that we've solved it typically at MicroStrategy is giving you this thing called a semantic graph that allows you to connect to lots of data, and then you can specify exactly how it should query and how it should work. And then everything downstream you can then trust, right? But even that, if you think about it, that's a lot of work for people, and the data volumes obviously continue to grow. And so when we look to the future, this is actually an area that AI, I think, can really solve it, because the nice thing about AI is it works while you're not working, right? It works while you're sleeping. And so, you end up with huge amounts of CPU and compute that's available to you. And if you can have the AI process through this information and at least try to figure out how to structure it in a way that humans can then work with, that can provide a big step forward. And I really do think, we're at the infancy of that, right? So this is a journey that'll probably take 10 years. But I think that's going to be the big difference. I think 10 years from now, when we look back, we'll be like, yeah, all that data modeling and stuff, isn't it nice that the AI just does it for us?
If it's helping get the right people, the right data with the least amount of work, then that's going to provide tremendous value across the entire organization. And that's what people need to understand, is what the power really is once you have that data, which does lead me to a question that I'm curious to have you talk to us about, because when we've historically had these conversations, we've always talked about how in IoT particularly, it's all about getting data from the physical world, collecting that data, and then using AI to help analyze it and turn it into something that is actionable. So in the organizations that you work with, when we're thinking about just data in general, where are companies often getting their data, which I imagine is a variety of different sources, but how are they then able to take this data and decide, well, this data is good or this data is bad, and which data is useful versus which data is not useful? Because I imagine that is a big part once they figure out how they even get the data or what data they're even going to kind of pull into these tools.
Yeah, they usually do two things. One is they actually don't think that much about sorting through the data in the beginning anymore, which I think is good. Like back in the day, you would be very precise about the data that you put into your data lakes and data warehouses. More and more, you just dump them in. You just dump the data in, like wherever it's coming from, just dump it in as, as Parquet files or whatever it is that you want to do. And you sort of dump it in. Then what you do is what I said before, which is you start with the goal in mind and work your way back to the data that you need. So for example, in this building, let's say you're trying to optimize energy spend on HVAC in a building, right? Well, how would you do that? Well, you would have sensors in the building that tell you the temperature, that would tell you where the vents are and all that. You would have energy sensors that tell you how much energy you're using for different HVAC systems. And then you would try to optimize for that, like exactly when should something turn on or off, right? This is not really a BI problem, but it's an understandable problem. You can apply it to pretty much every. But the point is, you're not just collecting any and all data the HVAC system can produce. You're not taking any and all data that a building can produce. You have it, but you're really starting with, okay, I'm trying to optimize energy spend for an HVAC system, and then you work your way back to the data that you need to do. Usually.
It's interesting because over the last couple of years, we've had a lot of conversations on like what clean data is, what good data is, what bad data is. And that's definitely transformed as the tools have become more sophisticated, as well as the organizations are better understanding as what they're trying to accomplish, so that they can kind of weed out early on the data that they don't care about and then focus on the data they do care about and making it actionable and making sure it's disseminated around the organization so people can actually use it, which is great.
There was a time where with photos, for example, where you were very careful about the photos that you kept, right? You put them in albums, you delete them for whatever reason, right? There was space limitations on whatever. Nowadays, you don't think about any of that. You just take a whole bunch of photos and they self-organize and they self-back up and it's just there. And so we're kind of moving towards a world where it's like, yeah, don't manage the input at all. Just take as much data as you want, but we'll deal with it at the output when you actually decide what you want to do with the thing.
So let me ask you, as it stands today and kind of as we move forward, how can companies that are listening to this bring this discussion up? What should they be talking about? What should they be doing to integrate AI, Gen AI, other types of tools and technologies into maybe their existing BI infrastructure that they have, the BI stack that they have and they're using? What will that enable them, or how should they kind of be communicating what this will enable them to do?
I would take two very, very different approaches. The first approach is to start with your corporate goals and work your way back, right? So you might have some goal to improve operational efficiency. You might have some goal to, increase customer satisfaction or whatever it might be, right? And work your way back to, okay, well, what kinds of experiences and use cases can we imagine to improve that thing? Like if you think you can improve the customer experience by serving them 10% faster, and you can serve them 10% faster if you understand exactly when they got to the store or the restaurant and exactly what they want. Well, okay, well, that's the data that you really want to look at. And that's where you want to employ AI, right? Like, can AI help you actually achieve that thing? And so I'm starting with like some corporate goals and working your way back. And the power of that is that if you're an IT person or you're a data person, it's a lot easier to then go and convince management that that's something worth doing, because they've already convinced themselves that those corporate goals are goals that they want to achieve. And so now you're just completely aligning with these corporate goals, right? So that's one place that I would start. It's the most practical place to start. Use cases, corporate goals, or departmental goals, whatever it might be. And if you don't have those, it never hurt to look at things like profitability, cost, growth rates, customer experience as, product experience as the first sort of place. The other thing though, and less and less people do this nowadays, but I would carve out some amount of time. I don't know if it's 10% of your energy or something like this, to just think of the art of the possible with the technology that because if you're only looking at the bottom line, if you're only looking at the corporate goals, you get very focused, which is great. That's the benefit of it. And you can actually deliver a result. But some percentage of your time, again, maybe 5 or 10%, it's certainly not 80%, to ideate and to think outside the box is what allows some of these new technologies to come to bear. So and one example I'll use of that is, when the iPhone was invented, 15 years ago, we all knew like, wow, this thing's going to change the world. Like it's totally going to change the world. But we didn't know how. There was like the obvious stuff, like we can use the iPhone for better XYZ. Like there was a bunch of things that were obvious. But a bunch of things happened, like Uber, Twitter, like a bunch of things happened because of the iPhone and always on connectivity that couldn't have been predicted at the time. And it does require people to kind of step outside of their day-to-day and kind of go, how can we use this? So my recommendation for people that are playing with this technology and have goals is spend 80% of your time focused on being aligned with what the company's trying to achieve and finding use cases specific to that. That's always going to be good. But don't do it 100%. Like carve out a little bit to ideate, to think outside the box. So you might discover some really interesting things that can differentiate your business.
Where do you think this is all going? Like what's the future kind of look like over the next couple of years? What are you most excited about? What should people like pay attention to?
Yeah, what I'm really excited about, a lot of people worry about their jobs. I'll sort of end with this, right? I think AI can make each one of us potentially 10x more valuable, right? Because if the AI can help you and you can do 10 times as much stuff, whether it's serving 10 times as many use cases, driving 10 times more value, you're actually 10x more valuable. Now, you might not get paid 10x more, but you might get paid 2x more, right? And so any scenario, if you look back at history, any time we were able to invent a technology that made an individual human more powerful, like more capable and deliver more value, those individual humans, first worried about their jobs, but then what actually happened is things evolved and the standard of living went up. And most of these people actually ended up making more money and doing more good for the world. And so that's what I'm really excited about, right? Is there's a million examples of ways that data can help people deliver better customer experiences, deliver better shareholder value, deliver better employee experience. There's a million examples of that we can talk about. But the really cool thing is we now have an opportunity to actually capture more of those opportunities because AI can help us do our jobs faster, right? Help us identify those opportunities, see things that maybe we didn't see before, or just handle the mundane tactical things so we can spend more time on the strategic as well. So I kind of see it as like the digital Iron Man. All of a sudden we all get a little bit more smarter and stronger. And so that's really what I'm excited about.
obviously ChatGPT has been out for a little while now, but just when that came out, people became very curious as to what can tools like this actually enable me and my organization to do on, very different levels. So I think you just amplify that and grow it across different roles, different responsibilities, different tasks in an organization, and the entire organization itself will just become more efficient and hopefully more just better at what they're doing. And I think that's what's most exciting to really focus on.
I was watching a Steve Jobs video a long, long time ago, and he tells a story about if you looked at the amount of energy that it took for an animal to travel, mammals on Earth to travel from one place to another, humans don't rank very high. Like eagles, condors, horses, they all rank much higher than we do. From our physical capabilities, we're not that good. But you give a human being a bicycle, and all of a sudden they can go much further, right? And the advent of the computer was that, times 1,000. And I think our AI is another big step forward where, we all just become capable of doing a lot more things, which is, I think, generate.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. I mean, I think the more people could open their eyes and minds to understanding that there's a lot of value here, while at the same time being, cautious at times, because there are things that are not as they seem, and there are things that can lead you down a path to get things that are maybe incorrect data or incorrect outputs. Just be aware of kind of the negative side of it all.
And that's the thing, right? It's an amplifier. And so, if you use ChatGPT, I'll give you an example. If you ask ChatGPT something and it's an area that you don't know very well, you will think ChatGPT is absolutely brilliant because it's like, wow, that's amazing. Because you don't know any better anyway, so you don't know the right answer. And so it sounds like a perfectly reasonable right answer. But if you ask it about something you know really well, you're suddenly like, this doesn't seem quite right. And so it doesn't, these things, again, they're tools and they're amplifiers. If we are not informed, if we're not skilled as individuals, then it's just going to amplify that. But if we are skilled and we know what we're doing, it can also amplify that. So it actually increases the need for us to be good at what we do so that we know how to use a tool to actually amplify the good and not amplify the ignorant.
You can look at that at any job. It's like if you have the expertise and you have the insights into what you're doing, you could feed it the right information, feed it the right prompts to basically teach it, act and think like you. And then hopefully you can use that information to create an output that makes you more efficient with your time, because it does the things that take you the most time. But you can then verify the information, vet the information, make sure it's all correct, obviously. But there are pieces of that process that it can definitely help with. Well, really appreciate you taking the time. This has been awesome. Tell our audience where they can learn more about what y'all have going on, maybe follow up if they have any questions, anything like that.
Absolutely. If they go to MicroStrategy.com, there's a lot to check out there. We just launched, about a year ago now, we launched our new AI product, and we've continued enhancing it since then. So check it out. It is definitely the intersection between AI and business intelligence. And we'd like to think we're at the forefront of that. And it's been a lot of fun with our customers as well.
That's awesome. I'm familiar. I mean, I think most familiar just because of your all's Bitcoin kind of stance and holdings over the years. That's been something that's definitely caught my attention. So I think you guys are doing some fantastic things over there. I really appreciate it, and hope to have you back sometime in the future to talk further about what's going on in the world.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone.